Our style of travel was very different. Hello and welcome. Welcome to Input English. My wife and I had very different visions of how to travel. And it makes sense, looking back, why. We were taught to travel by different parents who had very different attitudes about travel. Years ago, when my wife and I got together, we started traveling together, and we quickly discovered that our attitudes about traveling, how to travel, what to do, were completely different. And that makes sense. We were very different people. We had very different personalities, and you could say opposites attract. It's funny, we had different approaches, but we never really got into big conflict about this. You might suspect that the reason we avoided conflict on this was related to my wife's ability to avoid conflict. That is possible. I was taught to travel by my parents. During childhood, we had a lot of trips. You may remember that they were both trained as photographers, and they tended to look at travel as very destination-oriented and very photographically oriented. So trips with my parents when I was growing up tended to be trips to a specific destination, and make sure you get a good picture with you standing in front of Mount Rushmore or in front of the Grand Canyon or you in front of a great mountain scene. These were our experiences growing up. I was taught during my upbringing that travel was all about the destination. So, as an adult, when I had the ability to plan my own travel, I recapitulated that pattern. I reenacted that type of travel. I wanted to see a lot of things because logically I didn't have that much free time for travel. So when I was traveling, I always considered that time very precious. And so I tried to pack a lot into each trip to get the maximum benefit for the time that we had available. My wife was taught to travel by her parents, and they had a very different approach. They approached it as an experience. The whole trip was an experience. And she was taught to go to a destination and settle in and explore and enjoy and be there for a time. So when we got together and started traveling together, she was baffled that I turned every trip into a forced march. Yes. And I was baffled that she was willing to squander this precious vacation time by just kind of lounging around in a destination, relaxing. Now, who was right? Well, of course, she was. Now, we got something for this over the years, because what I brought to the equation was enthusiasm about seeing a lot of interesting places. And what she brought to the equation was simmering down and actually enjoying the place where we had arrived. My wife doesn't do YouTube, so we're not going to have her on here to be interviewed and discuss this. Early on in our relationship, she and I recognized that we were very different, but very complementary, the yin and yang of a couple. And we found that these complementary differences worked out really well for us. Years later, she jokingly pointed out that we had each succeeded in finding someone who was compatible, complementary, and then over time, we had molded them and shaped them into the spouse we wanted. And I think that's literally true, because I had a lot of influence on her, and the way she approached things, and she had lots of influence on me. We agree that those influences, that molding of each other, was very beneficial. We have always had a great ability to avoid conflict, and that may have just been because of her extraordinary ability to get along with people no matter what. Over the years, our travel underwent a transformation. She was very successful in convincing me that we should go to a location, set up a place to stay, and then venture out from there, enjoying that locale. Now, one of the ways she did this is she took control of the trip planning. Early on, I was the one that planned the trips, but later on, she was pouring through the internet, finding interesting places and filling out calendars and making reservations. So really, she took control of all our trip planning, and that resulted in trips where we would go to a destination, set up a base camp, and stay there for about a week. This was her ideal plan for travel. If you were to ask my wife what I did on these trips, she would explain to you that I provided navigation services, security services, light entertainment, and perhaps some financial support. Those were my jobs on these trips. Of course, I'm joking. We did have that conversation, though. We went to Rome on 2 different occasions together. The first visit, I planned the trip, and we saw all the usual tourist sites. The second trip, she planned, and the first great thing she did was have us not stay in Rome. No, she got us a B&B at an agroturismo, that is a working farm. It was a vineyard and olive orchard farm in Orvieto. So that was a little more than an hour train ride from Rome. We stayed there for a week. It was magnificent, an old hill town. We had to drive out of town by car to get to this working farm, and we had a wonderful place to stay. The meals they provided were magnificent, but with a simple train ride, we could go into Rome and explore. Now, on that trip, we also explored more interesting places than I had taken her years earlier. I think our trips over the years have shown us the great yin and yang we've developed with each other. And I have to credit my wife with the success on this, because I think it is her style of avoiding conflict that allowed this to work. That's the end of this episode. I hope you enjoyed it. I invite comments below, and I hope to see you in future videos. See you soon.